In the 1920 season, Juventus saw themselves win their 9th Serie A title in a row, beating Napoli out by 1 point, having a dominant run in Italy that made Italy seem like at times that the Serie A was like Ligue 1, or at the time the Bundesliga, that was ruled by one juggernaut, leaving the rest of the clubs in the league to fight for whatever position is left on the table. Yet since the 1920 season, Juventus have only managed a top 3 finish once, that being last season, after finishing 4th twice and finishing 7th the season before last, even though yes, the reason Juventus finished 7th was because of a 10-point deduction because of financial irregularities, but last season after finishing 3rd, yes, their highest finish since winning it in 2020, but they were 4 points behind 2nd place in AC Milan, but even more worryingly, they were 23 points behind Serie A winners Inter Milan. So Juventus knew that they had to make big changes this summer, and they have already done so, firing Max Alegri and having already brought in 3 permanent signings, as well as being linked to a whole host of talented players around Europe, and having already sold 5 players. And I'm a big fan of some of the moves that Juventus have made this summer. But why do I think this? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Back of the Net here. I hope you're all doing well. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. Now, the first major move from Juventus this summer was actually before the summer even started, was to fire Max Allegri just 2 days after winning the Coppa Italia final against Europa League winners Atalanta and still having 2 games left in the Serie A. 2 games that they would go on to win 1 and draw 1. But they fired Allegri because he lashed out at a decision during the game, ripped his jacket off, and got a red card in stoppage time of the final. And Juventus said that it didn't align with their values, but I don't buy it. Yes, it was really uncalled for from Allegri, and it didn't paint a good image for Juventus, but I have a suspicion that they may have used it as an excuse to sack a manager that had done so much for them over the course of his career, and hire someone that Juventus were rumored to be drooling over the whole of last season in Bologna's manager Thiago Motta. Now, the hiring of Motta, I think, is extremely good business by Juventus. Might actually be their best business of the summer. Not only does it weaken a team in Bologna that finished just 3 points behind them, but it also gives them a young manager at the age of just 41 years old, which is very young for a manager. It gives you a manager that is an Italian legend as a player. It gives you a manager who has some very interesting and seemingly effective tactics. And it gives you a manager who has proven to be able to get the most out of players like he did at Bologna, and maybe to slightly lesser extent at Spezia. Motta should work very well at Juventus as the main man. But I do think despite his success at Bologna last season, I do think Juventus and their fans may have to be slightly patient with him in case Juventus get off to a slow start with these new tactics that Motta will bring in and with the new players that Juventus and Motta will bring in. But then you look at the moves on the player sides that Juventus have done, and I'm reasonably impressed. For the outgoings, they sold players who, let's be honest, were never going to make it at Juventus, in the 22-year-old Brazilian Caio Jorge, who played just 22 games last season on loan and scored just 3 goals, yet they still sold him for 7.2 million euros, which I think is very impressive, all things considered. They then cut their losses on Conny De Vinter for 8 million euros, again another 22-year-old who is a centre-back this time, who was yes pretty decent at Genoa, but was never going to make it at Juventus, at least not in the immediate future. They also cut their losses on 24-year-old Moise Kean for 13 million euros to Fiorentina, and they sold Enzo Barencha and Samuel Elling Jr. to Aston Villa for a combined 22 million euros as part of the Douglas Luiz deal, even though technically it isn't part of the deal, being that Aston Villa wanted to sign those 2 players, but instead of making it a straight swap for Douglas Luiz, they broke them all into individual deals. They also let the likes of 33-year-old Alexandro and 29-year-old Adrian Rabiot's contracts expire, with Juventus' thoughts on the future. Now, I'm not too keen with the fact that Juventus are willing to sell Federico Chiesa for just 25 million euros, but with Thiago Motta not being the biggest fan of Chiesa and wanting a different profile of a winger, and with the fact that Chiesa's contract expires in 2025, it does kind of make sense that Juventus just have to sell him. But overall, if you look at it, I like the outgoings from Juventus and I like what they are trying to build. But when you look at the incomings as well, then Juventus to me start looking really good. I already talked about the amazing hire of Thiago Motta, But when you look at it on the player side, again, it's very impressive. They brought in a goalkeeper in tkgabriel on a loan from Monza that cost 4.5 million euros with an obligation to buy of 13.5 million euros in aims to sell Szczesny. Now, tkgabriel is a very good season last season at Monza, conceded just 35 goals from an expected XG of a massive 47.29, meaning that he prevented 12.2 goals last season in a fairly average, if maybe slightly below average Monza team. tkgabriel is also a really good passer of the ball as well, and he is a much better keeper with his feet than Szczesny is, which we know Motta values very highly. He's a very underrated goalkeeper, not too many people know about him, but at Juventus, I hope he is able to show how good he is. The next and biggest signing so far for Juventus this summer is getting ex-Aston Villa midfielder Douglas Luiz for 51.5 million euros. And I like this signing a lot. Yes, it's a fair chunk of change to pay, but with Douglas Luiz being just 26 years old, entering his prime, and with Juventus having lost Adrian Rabiot and Douglas Luiz, in my opinion, being a perfect fit for this Juventus midfield, I really like this move. Douglas Luiz is a set-piece threat. He can take penalties, free kicks, and corners. He is a very, very good passer of the ball, which will suit Motta's system perfectly. He wins the ball very high up and is very good at that. And although not often, but at times he can lack defensively, Juventus has been linked with the likes of Todibo from Nice and other defenders, as well as bringing in a defensively responsible midfielder in Thuram. I don't think there'll be a huge issue in Douglas Luiz's game for Juventus. I really like the idea of Juventus signing Douglas Luiz, and I think he's a perfect fit for Juventus and for Motta's system. Kefran Thuram, a son of Lilian Thuram and a brother of Marcus Thuram. Thuram is actually a very underrated signing for Juventus, and it's a very clever move by Motta and Juventus. Bringing the 23-year-old in for just 20 million euros from Nice, in my opinion, is very good business. Thuram is 6'4", very strong. Overall, he has very good physicality, making him very good in duels in both the air and on the ground. He has a lot of stamina and covers a lot of ground when playing for Nice. He is very good at arriving late into the box. He has a very decent long shot to him. He's a very capable and impressive passer and is responsible defensively, which allowed Nice to be expansive in midfield while remaining somewhat solid. He is the perfect prototype of a modern day midfielder. Strong, quick, aggressive, and has a high football IQ. I think next to Douglas Luiz, with the likes of Locatelli in the midfield, under the leadership of former midfielder Thiago Motta, I think Thuram will develop quite nicely and be a very good pickup for just 20 million euros. Now, Juventus still have a lot of work to do this summer. A lot of players they are still linked to, and a lot of players they will still likely sell. And at the end of the window, I may make another video about it to assess their window as a whole. But so far, Juventus, in my eyes, have been doing extremely well. From selling players that were never really going to move the needle for them, from keeping important players like Vlahovic, from bringing in a very good and promising manager in Thiago Motta, and for the 3 impressive signings they've already made, they are taking all the right steps and making all the right moves as of right now to get as close as possible to getting their hands on the Serie A title again.